And I was going to be sent down to LA to get a bunch of training to be a specialist in a particular job I was going to do. And so I was going to have to sign on for a 5-year stint. So that's what I did. And I ended up working in Santa Barbara for about 8 years total. I went from this was in 1987 that I joined staff, and I worked there through 1995. So 8 years in Santa Barbara. And then after 8 years of not being paid and not really, growing the organization very much, it was a small place. I mean, we had like 10, 20 staff members at a time. It fluctuated, but it was a pretty small place. And I thought, well, we're not really making this happen. And our job here as staff members is to clear the planet. That's the Scientology term for bringing Scientology to the world and turning everybody into Scientologists, is clearing the planet, getting everybody up to the state.
Nothing about that, is there?
Yeah, no, not at all, man. It's the funny thing about being in a cult is that you're the last person who knows it.
Well said.
You really think you're onto, you think you're onto something amazing and onto something really special. And then, it's only when things start getting really dark and weird and crazy that you start maybe wondering, maybe something's not quite right here. And I've always said I'm a bit of a slow learner, so it took me a while. I mean, I'm not unintelligent, but, it does take a bit to get through my thick skull sometimes. And so
you're in good company here.
So what happened is after 8 years, instead of realizing I was part of something kind of stupid and silly, because it had been my whole life, because I was second generation, because I'd really been raised with these ideas, I really firmly believe that L. Ron Hubbard was the guy who had the inside line. I don't want to use words like savior because that brings a Messiah thing in, and Scientologists don't really think of L. Ron Hubbard in that way. I just thought he was a really genius guy who came up with all this amazing stuff, and he was this philosopher genius. And wasn't it amazing that he had the kind heart and the moral compass to write all this stuff down and spend all these years working for mankind to, save the world. That was kind of how I had thought of him in my mind. So after 8 years of Santa Barbara, just 1 second, and then let me do that. I doubled down and I joined the Sea Organization. And that was in 1995. And by double down, I mean, I went all in. I'd been working my ass off for 8 years. I wasn't getting paid by the organization. So I had to have another job. So I was working 80-hour weeks, pretty much didn't really have any kind of social life, but I was dedicated, and I was proud of my dedication. And I believed all the hype. Even after all those years of not making it, I thought it was our fault that we weren't making. I didn't blame Scientology. I blamed myself. That's another thing that cults do. And they did it really well with me. I was all in. So when I joined the Sea Organization, I had to move down to Los Angeles. And that was, kind of a paramilitary group. And that's when you sign the billion-year contract and you're all in all the way. And I did that for another 17 years until 2012. And that was, there's a lot of experiences in that 17 years. And the last, I'd say 8 or 9 of those years were the time it took me to start realizing that I was involved in something pretty nefarious and creepy and weird, actually. But it took me a long time to bust through all the cognitive dissonance and the barriers and ideas that I had before I finally realized in 2012 that I needed to stop doing this. And then finally in 2013 is when I got all the way out totally. I got access to the internet, which I had not had all those years. I found out all the things on the internet that all you guys can find out about. I didn't know those things when I was in. No, hardly any Scientologists do. So that's when I realized I'd been scammed for all those years and taken advantage of. And needless to say, I was a little upset. And that's when I started my activism against these groups and my education to find out what they're all about. And that's what's led me to talking to you guys today.
Well, I want to get to what it was that finally made you, I guess, really go clear in just a second. But the thing that I have been wondering this entire time in researching you and your book is, how can you not see that L. Ron Hubbard is a science fiction writer and make that connection that it might be just another grand story of a science fiction work? Like, did that ever cross your mind in going through it?
No,
gotcha.
Not at all.
You didn't put those together?
Here's why. Okay, this is not an uncommon question, but it's a question that's steeped in hindsight bias, because in the 1950s and 60s, science fiction writers often were scientists, legit accredited scientists. Arthur C. Clarke, right? Ray Bradbury, Robert Heinlein, who's an engineer. I mean, these guys had science backgrounds.
I love Heinlein. I love all of them. Heinlein, yes.
Yeah, I mean, they're all pretty good. I mean, Arthur C. Clarke was amazing. Ray Bradbury was amazing.
Oh, yeah. All of them.
So it's not uncommon that somebody would come out of that time period of pulp fiction. Being a pulp fiction writer wasn't a second-class job. It was a writer job, and it was how L. Ron Hubbard paid his bills for decades when he was growing up and first out in the world. And he didn't just write science fiction. He wrote fantasy, westerns, romance, detective, adventure, all of it. He wrote everything. It's true that there were whole pulp fiction magazines that were filled with his stories under different pseudonyms. I mean, the guy could put out the writing, and in all different styles and stuff. So it wasn't like we thought, oh, he was a science fiction writer, and look at all this science fiction in Scientology. Those dots never connected because of what I just told you. And also, get this, in L. Ron Hubbard's lectures in Scientology, he would comment on his writing all the time and on other pulp fiction writers too. And he specifically said one day, all these guys who are writing science fiction and coming up with these stories, all they're doing is remembering the actual past from millions and trillions of years ago and writing it down as stories now. Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
Sounds legit.
That's good.
So because here's the thing, and this is a really key part of understanding Scientologists and actually understanding quite a few cults, but especially Scientology. There's a principle of faith you have to buy into, and no Scientologist thinks that they're accepting this on faith, but they are, and I frame it this way on purpose. You have to buy into this article of faith that you are an immortal spiritual being, which is referred to as a thetan. They don't call it a ghost or a spirit or a soul. They call it a thetan. It's from the Greek letter theta. You add an N on the end of it and it becomes a noun, right? So you're a thetan, I'm a thetan, we're all thetans. And you're not your body. You are this immortal spiritual entity called a thetan. It's really analogous to having a soul or being a spiritual entity. This is a very common belief all over the world. So it ties into Buddhism, it ties into Hinduism, it ties into any kind of basic major religious system you'll find. So it's easy to accept it as a commonly held belief. But in Scientology, the idea is that you are this immortal spiritual being who has existed for a near infinite amount of time into the past. And you will continue to exist into infinity in the future. You cannot die. There is no death for a thetan. Once you buy that basic idea, which is easy to sell, because a lot of people want to buy into that idea, anything in the past is possible. Because if you've been around for trillions or quadrillions of years, what have you been doing all that time? Well, you haven't just been here on Earth. And if we buy into the idea that there's life on other places in the universe, which most of us do just based on the mathematical probability of it, if for no other reason, then you buy into the idea that aliens are real, space travel is real, civilizations on other planets are real. And once you buy into that, Star Wars is a documentary. It's not a work of George Lucas's fiction, right?
It may have happened.
Fantasy.
It may have happened.
So right, and Scientologists. Yeah. Well, here's the thing, right? Why not? Because
they do preface
Scientologists love the fact that Lucas prefaced Star Wars with a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Right.
They love that because to them that's reality, and it's not something that happens in the future. It's something that's already happened. Star Wars is ancient history as far as the milieu, the story of it goes. And Scientologists basically buy into that concept. And so anything and everything has happened in these last many trillions and quadrillions of years. And
so the story of Xenu, totally plausible in their mind. So the whole volcano,
totally,
time bombs,
absolutely.
Why not? Okay.
Absolutely. What a genius move! Now, as
no, he was
ludicrous
a genius.
as we can all say that is now, that's outrageously genius on his part. I must say.
You would agree that L. Ron Hubbard was extremely nefarious in what he did, I think, but he was a prolific writer. He was a genius. The guy was not a dumb person by any stretch of the imagination, right?
No, he was not a dumb person. He was not the smartest cookie to come down the lane, but he was not, he was crafty, he was wily, he was a pathological liar, so he could talk himself out of almost any situation. And of course, remember that all of Scientology was formulated in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and, he died in 86. There was no internet to fact check the guy against.
Right. Good point.
So, so all these things we have now that tell us what an idiot and fools Scientologists are, well, they didn't have any of those tools with which to check it. You couldn't just Google L. Ron Hubbard. So his life story, you believed what he said because that was the only place you were going to get his life story from. You weren't going to go down to the Naval Records Yard, and pull his records. You weren't going to go to Georgetown University and pull his college transcripts. You weren't going to go back in his history and talk to his family. So you weren't going to know that the guy was a screaming pathological liar and megalomaniac. You weren't going to know those things. So you take it on face value, and there you go.
But you said something that I find this would have been the one thing where I would have been like, nope, deuces, I'm out. When you said that they don't, you couldn't get on the internet. You went all of this time with the internet actually able to be got on, but for what reason were you not allowed to get online? That would have been it for me.
Well, I was able to get online. I was not able to look at anything about Scientology. So I could do, there were periods where as the internet started progressing and, into the 2000s, really, I was out and about doing projects and missions and various things for Scientology. And I had a laptop with an internet dongle and I could get on the net. But I wasn't allowed to, and no one in Scientology is allowed to look at what they term N theta. Okay? Which is bad news, criticism, anything about Scientology that paints it in a bad light, absolutely verboten. And here's how that works. Because again, this is a little bit of subtle genius going on here. You convince everybody that all these things about spiritual entities and Scientology and getting counseling in Scientology are true, that these are factual, literally true things. You then make it clear to somebody that if they go reading or discussing or talking about Scientology or their progress in Scientology with people who are critical of Scientology, who do not have its best intentions in mind, who want to destroy Scientology, want to do away with it, they're going to get in the way of your spiritual progress. They're presenting you with problems all day long. You want to do Scientology, and here's this jerk off who won't just be tolerant and allow you to have your freedom of religion, right?
Well,
this is how it's framed, right?
I'm not jerk off, but I let people believe what they want, but I'm gonna explain things to them if they ask. You know.
Well, Scientologists, if they ask, right? But Scientologists